Daniel chapter 5. Belshazzar the king made a great feast to the 1,000 of his lords, and drank wine before the 1,000. Belshazzar, while he tasted the wine, commanded that the golden and silver vessels, which Nebuchadnezzar his father had taken out of the temple, which was in Jerusalem, be brought to him, that the kings and his lords, his wives and his concubines might drink from them. Then they brought the golden vessels that were taken out of the temple of God's house, which was at Jerusalem, and the king and his lords, his wives and his concubines drank from them. They drank wine and praised the gods of gold and of silver, of bronze, of iron, of wood, and of stone. In the same hour, the fingers of a man's hand came out and wrote near the lampstand, on the plaster of the wall of the king's palace. The king saw the part of the hand that wrote. Then the king's face was changed in him, and his thoughts troubled him, and the joints of his thighs were loosened, and his knees struck one against another. The king cried out aloud to bring in the enchanters, the Chaldeans, and the soothsayers. The king spoke and said to the wise men of Babylon, "Whoever reads this writing and shows me its interpretation shall be clothed with purple, and have a chain of gold about his neck, and shall be the third ruler in the kingdom." Then all the king's wise men came in, but they could not read the writing, and couldn't make known to the king the interpretation. Then King Belshazzar was greatly troubled, and his face was changed in him, and his lords were perplexed. The queen, by reason of the words of the king and his lords, came into the banquet house. The queen spoke and said, "O king, live forever. Don't let your thoughts trouble you, nor let your face be changed. There is a man in your kingdom, in whom is the spirit of the holy gods, and in the days of your father light and understanding and wisdom, like the wisdom of the gods, were found in him. The king Nebuchadnezzar, your father, yes, the king your father, made him master of the magicians, enchanters, Chaldeans, and soothsayers, because of an excellent spirit, knowledge, understanding, interpreting of dreams, showing of dark sentences, and dissolving of doubts were found in the saved Daniel, whom the king named Belteshazzar. Now let Daniel be called, and he will show the interpretation." Then Daniel was brought in before the king. The king spoke and said to Daniel, "Are you that Daniel of the children of the captivity of Judah, whom the king my father brought out of Judah? I have heard of you, that the spirit of the gods is in you, and that light, understanding, and excellent wisdom are found in you. Now the wise men, the enchanters, have been brought in before me, that they should read this writing, and make known to me its interpretation. But they could not show the interpretation of the thing. But I have heard of you, that you can give interpretations and dissolve doubts. Now if you can read the writing and make known to me its interpretation, you shall be clothed with purple, and have a chain of gold around your neck, and shall be the third ruler in the kingdom." Then Daniel answered before the king, "Let your gifts be to yourself, and give your rewards to another. Nevertheless, I will read the writing to the king, and make known to him the interpretation. To you, king, the Most High God gave Nebuchadnezzar your father the kingdom and greatness and glory and majesty. Because of the greatness that he gave him, all the peoples, nations, and languages trembled and feared before him. He killed whom he wanted to, and he kept alive whom he wanted to. He raised up whom he wanted to, and he put down whom he wanted to. But when his heart was lifted up, and his spirit was hardened, so that he dealt proudly, he was deposed from his kingly throne, and they took his glory from him. He was driven from the sons of men, and his heart was made like the animals, and his dwelling was with the wild donkeys. He was fed with grass like oxen, and his body was wet with the dew of the sky, until he knew that the Most High God rules in the kingdom of men, and that he sets up over it whomever he will. You, his son Belshazzar, have not humbled your heart, though you knew all this, but have lifted up yourself against the Lord of heaven, and they have brought the vessels of his house before you, and you and your lords, your wives, and your concubines have drunk wine from them. You have praised the gods of silver and gold, of bronze, of iron, wood, and stone, which don't see or hear or know, and you have not glorified the God in whose head your breath is. and whose are all your ways? Then the part of the hand was sent from before him, and this writing was inscribed. This is the writing that was inscribed: MENE, MENE, TEKE, PARSIN. This is the interpretation of the thing. MENE, God has counted your kingdom and brought it to an end. TEKE, you have been weighed in the balances and found wanting. PERES, your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. Then Belshazzar commanded, and they clothed Daniel with purple, and put a chain of gold around his neck, and made proclamation concerning him, that he should be the third ruler in the kingdom. In that night, Belshazzar the Chaldean king was slain. Darius the Mede received the kingdom, being about 62 years old. All right, the writing on the wall. And so this is a story where Belshazzar is having a party. He gets objects from the temple of the Lord taken from Jerusalem, and they're using the Lord's objects to worship other gods that are not even real. And so they greatly dishonor the Lord, and then the hand appears and writes on the wall this word of judgment to say it's all over. And out of that, we've received, this famous idiom in English, the writing is on the wall. So whenever anything's coming to an end, you might hear someone say, the writing was on the wall, and it just means that particular thing, it's all over. So we get so many colourful expressions of speech out of the Bible. Belshazzar, over and over and over, he refers to Nebuchadnezzar in this chapter as his father, or Nebuchadnezzar is referred to as his father. In a list of the Babylonian kings, Belshazzar is actually the fifth king in the list, and Nebuchadnezzar is like the first, depending on where you start the list from anyway. But in any case, there's a few kings in between. Nebuchadnezzar does not seem to be the direct father of Belshazzar, and so there's this big discussion about why is he called father over and over and over, and there's, one potential answer is that any king that preceded you could be called your father. That's an answer. Another commentator I read said that he was actually married to the daughter of King Nebuchadnezzar, and so Nebuchadnezzar was actually his father-in-law. So there you go. It's probably either or both of those, which explains that. So Nebuchadnezzar was king. His son was called Evil Merodach. I don't remember the name of the next son. And then the next king was Nabonidus. We talked about him in the last chapter. And then, some of these kings, they only were there for a handful of years. They weren't very long. And then Belshazzar was next. And as recently as 1924, people doubted that Belshazzar was a real king. But once again, archaeology has come to the rescue, like so many things in the Bible. According to a scholar called Millard, the event of this chapter, the party and the writing on the wall, happened on the night of October the 12th, 539 BC. I think it's amazing how they can, in certain circumstances, work out a very precise date for an ancient event. And the reason for that is not based on information in the Bible, but based on information elsewhere. And it has to do with the fact that on this very night, the Persian Empire conquered the city of Babylon. The Persians had already been conquering great big chunks of the Babylonian Empire, so the Babylonian Empire had been shrinking, but this was the night that they conquered Babylon, the October the 12th, 539 BC. And so what happened was King Cyrus the Great, I believe, diverted or partially diverted the water in the Euphrates River. Is it the Euphrates River or the Tigris? I always get those two confused. But the river that flows through Babylon, which I think is the Euphrates River, they diverted a part of the water, and so the water level dropped. The city of Babylon was built on the water, so that the main gates to the city were on the water level, and you would come in and out by boat, but it was obviously protected and well guarded, and at this particular time the gates were closed because of the Persian army that was nearby. However, in their intelligence, they had built this giant big canal. They had diverted a part of the river. The water level had dropped, and they were actually able to get in underneath the city gate in the middle of the night, and Belshazzar, the king, was slain. So that happens, of course, at the end of the chapter. But prior to that, we've got this feast where the Lord is dishonored. There's the writing on the wall. The writing says, your kingdom has been counted. It's been found to be weighing in the balances, and it's being given to the Persians, which is exactly what happened that very night. Daniel was clothed in purple as a reward. Purple is a colour that in ancient times is very hard to get and was worth a lot. We've talked previously in Ezekiel videos. In Ezekiel 26-27, we've talked about how the Phoenicians traded in purple, and they got that purple from the murex shell, which was found on the coast near where Lebanon is today, where the Phoenician cities are. And that purple shell was one of the reasons that made them really, really fabulously wealthy. And I remember listening to the History of Rome podcast, and sometime around about 100 AD, this is like well after Jesus. Domitian is Domitian was the Roman emperor who was struggling with inflation. And so he decided in his wisdom that he was going to set a fixed price for every item in the Roman Empire, and you had to sell it for the price that he said. And he set a price for purple dye at some hideously high sum, which I've forgotten, but it was something like 100,000 shekels. Not shekels, denarius. And something like that, per pint or whatever it was. And I remembered thinking at the time, wow, that explains why Lydia, the lady who was in the city of Philippi, she was a dealer in purple. That shows us that she was a wealthy business lady. And that Macedonian church in Philippi, which was one of Paul's favourite churches, they looked after him. I reckon this Lydia, the dealer in purple, had a lot to do with it. But in this chapter, Daniel interprets the prophecy, the Holy Spirit helps him, and he is clothed in purple. Now that was quite the thing. Now I'm wearing a purple shirt today, not deliberately, but this shirt didn't cost me more than about $30. In fact, I've got quite a few purple shirts and other shirts as well, and it's not that special. You can walk down the shops and see heaps of people wearing purple shirts. We had a funeral here recently in the church where the deceased, purple was their favourite colour, and we had about 300 people turn up to the funeral all wearing purple shirts. But in the day of Daniel, you didn't see people wearing purple. He is in this story. And so not only that, gold chain is put around him, and he is made third in the kingdom. Now you'd say, why third? Because earlier he's made second in charge. When Nebuchadnezzar was the king, Nebuchadnezzar puts him in charge of Babylon, effectively second in charge, because obviously the king's first in charge. But what's actually going on here is that Belshazzar, the king of Babylon, is actually acting king. The real king is actually his father, Nabonidus, which we've talked about before. But Nabonidus was unhealthy or sick and had actually stepped down from being the king, was kind of still the king, but his son is like ruling the nation as king. So Belshazzar in this chapter is actually the second in charge of the entire kingdom, even though he's the king. And by giving Daniel the third in charge position, he's actually making Daniel basically second in charge, if that makes sense. At least from reading commentaries, that seems to be what they are saying about that. And so he doesn't know what to do. He can't interpret the writing on the wall. In comes the queen, which is the queen mother, not the queen. So this is not the wife of the king. This is the mother of the king. And this is the wife of his dad. And she comes in, and her name is, I have it written down here, it's Nitocris. It's the Greek historian Herodotus that talks about this, so that's where we get her name from, Nitocris. And in Barnes' commentary, he thought that the queen had become a believer in the Lord. Or he at least thought there was a really serious possibility of it, because she had been around in the kingdom a long time, and she had known Daniel, she had known Nebuchadnezzar, Barnes has his reasons, but he thinks that the queen in this story was a believer in the Lord. It's going to be so interesting to get to heaven and meet a bucket load of people, and they're going to be like, I'm Nitocris. I was in Daniel chapter 5, Very cool if that is the case. And so we go on, and Belshazzar insults the Lord. Dr. Jordan, I've been reading Dr. James Jordan's commentary on Daniel. Dr. Jordan thinks that Belshazzar insulted the Lord deliberately. So he would have known that the vessels that came out of the temple were from the Lord's temple. So he knows they're from another god. And he knows he's going to use these vessels to worship his own gods. Not that god, his own gods. But Dr. James Jordan suggests, and he might be right, that there had been 70 years since the first exile, and Jeremiah had prophesied that there'd be 70 years before the nation was able to be released and to be returned. And Dr. James Jordan says that he thinks Belshazzar thought it was 70 years, but it had actually only been 68, so the 70 wasn't up for like another year or two. But that because of that prophecy of the 70, that he believed that he was doing this on purpose. I don't know if that's true or not, but either way, Belshazzar had to have known that he was using vessels from the Lord Yahweh, but he was using them to worship a different god. He had to have known it was insulting, and therefore the writing was on the wall. I think in our own lives, God's very gracious. God's a very gracious God. I think that we insult the Lord a lot without even knowing it. One of the ways that we insult the Lord is through our lack of faith in him. Do you imagine that you're all-powerful, you're all-knowing, you're capable of doing anything, you're kind, you make promises to your people, you say, trust me, I will help you. And then these weak little human beings like you and I, we doubt the Lord. We don't trust him. We do our things our own way. All of that's really insulting. It's like offering a gift to someone and they say, no, I don't want it. When we don't trust the Lord, it's actually insulting, but we don't do it on purpose. It's because we're so puny. Our brains are so small. Our hearts are so small. We do want to trust the Lord, but we often don't. So we insult him. I think the Lord is so kind and so gracious that he often overlooks that. Now, he was frustrated with his disciples. Why do you have so little faith? But he's patient as well. But I do tend to think that Belshazzar insulted the Lord on purpose, and I don't think that that's a wise idea. So let's always do our best to love and honor the Lord, and let's do our best to believe him, because that pleases him a great deal. Lord, I want to thank you for these chapters. I want to thank you that you work in the nations and you deal with them to bring about good outcomes. I pray you'd help us, Lord, to walk a path and a life that's honoring of the Lord, that shows that we fear you and we love you and we respect you. Lord, you're good to us. Help us to know you more. Amen.